you guys, welcome back to Flickers of Fear, my little movie review series. So how's this for a bizarre coincidence? So I had been sort of perusing the movies that Shudder had been adding all throughout the last couple months, like June, July, that I hadn't got around to watching yet. You know, with a view to kind of like putting them on the docket for my August reviews, or at least some of my August reviews, because I do kind of like to keep up with the new content that they post. And while I was looking through there, I happened upon this movie from 2010, and it was called All About Evil. I didn't really know all that much about it, but I read like the short synopsis. It's only like a sentence or two, and that actually sounded really fun. And it also had the coveted 5-skull ratings among like Shudder subscribers who had watched it, which you don't really see a lot. I mean, if you have a subscription to Shudder, I mean, a lot of good movies, even like a really good movie, will usually just get 4 because there'll be a couple in there being like, oh, this sucked, blah, blah, blah. So it's very, very rare to see one with 5 skulls, but this one had 5 skulls and that intrigued me. So I'm like, okay, I'm definitely going to watch that one then. So I scheduled it for viewing one Saturday afternoon when I knew that I wasn't going to have any other things going on. On the very morning of the day that I was planning to watch it, like before I even watched it, I happened to be randomly reading this article which had just been posted like a couple hours before I read it. And it was actually about the 30th anniversary of one of my favorite movies from the 1990s, which is Death Becomes Her, which is a fantastic dark comedy, if you haven't seen it, with Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn and Bruce Willis. And so it was kind of about the 30th anniversary of that and the movie's sort of the way that it's become kind of like a touchstone of queer culture. Now, a large part of this article was comprised of an interview with a filmmaker and iconic San Francisco drag performer called Peaches Christ, aka Joshua Grannell, I think is how you pronounce his last name, who it turns out also directed All About Evil. I totally did not do that on purpose, I swear to God. And I really don't know how that happened. I don't know how I managed to, like, that kind of kismet or, like, coincidental whatever, but there you go. Universe was, I guess, clearly telling me to watch and review this movie, so who am I to quibble with the universe? They wanted me to do it, so I'm doing it. So here you go. Now, apparently, All About Evil had a real limited release, like, back in 2010, and then went into kind of like a limbo for pretty much more than a decade. I think Joshua Grannell like actually released it privately, or like released it, like self-published it type of thing. And it was like really, really hard to get hold of for like a really long time. Now, thankfully, this travesty was recently rectified by good old Severin Films, who actually released a special edition Blu-ray of it in 2022. And as I mentioned, Shudder added it to their platform in June of this year. And good for them, I have to say, because All About Evil is a blast. It is so, so fun. It's essentially, this is the best way to describe it. It's like a gory slasher comedy, but funneled through the sensibilities of John Waters. You know what I mean? Now, John Waters is actually friends with Joshua Grannell, and John Waters actually was a producer on the film as well. So that will kind of give you like an idea of the kind of tone that this movie has. You know, if slasher gory comedy, like gory slasher comedy, like with a John Waters sensibility doesn't make you want to watch it, I don't know what's the matter with you. Like, I don't know what else I could say to like get you to watch it. It kind of has that same, a little bit like homegrown and like real campy vibe that something like John Waters' movie like Serial Mom or something like that might have. So if you were into Serial Mom, you'd probably really like this as well. Now, Natasha, is it Lyonne or Lyon? I'm not really sure how you pronounce her last name. I recognized her immediately from Slums of Beverly Hills and the movie But I'm a Cheerleader. This movie actually predates her being, you know, because I know she won a lot of awards for being in like Russian Doll and Orange is the New Black and stuff like that, but this was kind of like before that. So she's kind of the main star of the movie. Now, she stars as this woman named Deborah Tennis, who is a very, very unstable young woman, let's call it that, who will essentially do anything to keep her father's beloved San Francisco revival movie house, the Victoria Theater, up and running. The Victoria Theater is actually a real place in San Francisco. I don't know if they shot it there or if they just like recreated it for the movie, but it is like a real iconic like theater that they're referencing. So at the beginning of the movie, there's a prologue set in 1984. in which a young Deborah, who is dressed as Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, she's singing very awkwardly, like a little introductory song, because I guess like her family's theater is doing a screening of The Wizard of Oz, so she kind of like went up there to sing. And her dad is like accompanying her on the piano, and he's always telling her, you're going to be a big star one day, you're going to be in the movies and all this like that. But like she said, she's not homely little girl or nothing like that, but she's like very, very shy and awkward, clearly. So her dad like believes in her, but then her mom, Tammy, who is just the worst. She's like super, super cruel. And in this sequence, in the flashback sequence, she's actually dressed as the Wicked Witch of the West, which is like, very on the nose. She starts mocking the poor kid, like at pretty much every turn. Like, you're never going to amount to anything, blah, blah, blah. So during the song, the kids and parents in the audience are kind of like snickering at this awkward little girl like singing this song, and Deborah gets so nervous that she essentially like pees herself, right? And then she like there's a puddle on the by her feet, and then she gets electrocuted like when she touches the mic stand, you know what I mean? She does survive this, but she's obviously not going to be right after that, okay? So the movie then jumps ahead to the present day. And Deborah, who now I'm assuming as a result of the electrocution, now has kind of like a very kicky, like Bride of Frankenstein, like streak of white in her hair, which I thought was a nice touch. She's actually working as a librarian, and she's also doing like pulling night shift over. She's trying to keep her dad's deteriorating movie theater open. So she's basically, it's just like a one screener. It's really, really small. And so she shows screenings of like old horror and exploitation flicks, like, Blood Feast or, Blood Orgy, the She-Devil, stuff like that. Like, Ted V. Mickles, H.G. Lewis, all that kind of stuff. So she shows that kind of stuff to sort of like a not very big, just like this little handful of kind of hardcore horror hounds that come there every weekend to see them. So when we find her in the present, like her dad has just died, and she's really upset about it, obviously. And Tammy, her bitch mother, just wants to sell this old dump to developers so they can like put a Bed Bath & Beyond there or something like that. But Deborah, I mean, she very much took to heart her dad's whole thing. It was like the show must go on. She wants to keep the dream alive. But Tammy's just kind of like, you and your dad, you're both fucking losers and you're never going to amount to anything. So it's like, why don't you just give it up? She's, like I said, she's a real shit. Now, one of the aforementioned horror hounds who never misses a Friday at the Victoria Theater is this kid named Steven. And he's like a high school student. And the funny thing about that, he actually, in his room at home, he has a poster of, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, above his bed. And his mom in the movie is played by Elvira herself, Cassandra Peterson. Although she's absolutely not she's being total mom. She's like total serious mom. She's not being like funny or like boob jokes or nothing like that. So it's like really, really fun. I don't know. I found that really amusing, like in a really like nice bit of casting. But yeah, so they make like a couple like winks and homages to that, but I thought that was like really, really funny. Steven, it should also be mentioned, develops kind of something of a crush on Deborah as the movie goes on, even though she's, clearly quite a bit older than him. And that ends up causing some complications when he figures out what she eventually gets up to. So one night, Deborah's mom, Tammy, sashays into the theater and basically tries to force Deborah to sign the contract that will allow her to sell, because I guess the theater was left to her and Deborah like jointly. So she needs Deborah's signature on it, and Deborah's like, absolutely not. I want to keep it alive for dad and all this other stuff. So basically like Tammy is just like burns her on the hand, like on the popcorn maker or whatever. And she's like, okay, fine, I'll finally do it. But then she, her mom just keeps like berating her. And finally she's like, fuck this bitch. And she just like stabs her to death. She stabs her to death with a pen. It's pretty rad. Right in the lobby of the Victoria, while the patrons inside are waiting for the main feature to start. Now, the elderly projectionist, whose name is Mr. Twiggs, now he's worked at the theater for decades, and he actually stepped out on an errand to like get some medicine or something. So a frantic Deborah like rushes up to the projection booth. She wants to get Blood Feast started before the theater goers get any more restless than they already are. Unfortunately, while she's kind of like pressing around trying to get the movie to start, she accidentally screens the security camera footage of the murder she just committed, like her killing her mom with the pen. And so she's like, oh shit, I'm so busted. But then Mr. Twiggs comes back and finds Tammy's body like laying there all bloody in the lobby. And he decides he's going to step up and help Deborah out because he always thought Tammy was a complete twant and she totally had it coming. So he goes to the front of the theater and tells the audience, you guys have just witnessed the very first short horror film made by Deborah Tennis herself, and that from now on, like before every like main feature, every Friday night, there are going to be original horror shorts. She's going to keep making them, and you know, because it's like a big hit, because nobody thinks it's real. Everybody just kind of thinks it's like a movie. So he kind of like takes advantage of that to also like cover up the murder. So he then helps her out again by cleaning up the crime scene and like sticks Tammy's corpse up in the crumbling attic of the old building to sort of rot away quietly. He's like, this is up way too high. Nobody will smell it. It'll be fine. So from then on, Deborah and her right-hand man, Mr. Twiggs, they start making essentially short snuff films, bumping off annoying theater guests and, you know, other people that just kind of like cross their path that they think they can do away with without getting in trouble. And they start screening the films as fiction every Friday night to essentially like a steadily growing audience. And they start to sort of laud Deborah as the hottest new cult filmmaker in the Bay Area. So Deborah, she gets more and more unhinged as the movie goes on, starting to fancy herself something of an auteur, I guess. She starts dressing like a 40s silver screen diva, like acting super over the top, like some Joan Crawford kind of shit, that kind of stuff, insisting her name now be pronounced Deborah Denise, like instead of Deborah Tennis. It's like super funny. So her films are all based around classic literature, and they all have like really great titles like The Maiming of the Shrew and A Tale of Two Severed Titties, The Scarlet Leper, Gore and Peace. I mean, seriously, watch the entire end credits, because they'll put like, they made like posters for all the movies, because some of the movies they show them like making them in the movie, but some of the ones they didn't mention them and stuff. So they made like posters for them anyway, and they show them like during the end credits, and they're fucking great. Like just the titles of them are like super funny. Like I said, they're all sort of like puns on either classic literature titles or, you know, titles of old movies, but like with a horror flair to it. Like I Know Why the Caged Girl Screams, like stuff like that. So there's like a bunch of them. They're super funny. So then, like, as her ambition starts to expand, she also ends up recruiting a couple of psychos to kind of like serve as her film crew / murder squad. And one of these is this scuzzy criminal guy played by Noah Segan, who was also in Starry Eyes. He was in Tales of Halloween. He was in Knives Out. He was in Scare Package. You'll recognize him immediately if you're into horror. And also a pair of homicidal twins just released from an asylum who like killed their parents when they were children, and now they're grown up and they're letting them out. And they're played by Jade and Nikita Ramsey. Movie also has a small role for the famous John Waters regular, Mink Stoll, who I believe was in every single one of John Waters' movies, if I'm not mistaken. She stars as Deborah's kind of busybody co-worker at the library, and she gets to star in one of the snuff films, and also has an appearance by director Joshua Grannell playing his, you know, drag alter ego Peaches Christ. There's also a little bit of a subplot about Steven, because he's real into like the macabre, and he's really into horror movies, and he's always like drawing like fucked up like pictures and stuff. So it makes him a prime suspect when people around town start disappearing. Now, I will say I particularly liked kind of the satire here, because even though this is set in the present day, it does have kind of like a little bit of a throwback vibe still. And I kind of vividly remember being called into the high school guidance counselor's office more than once because one of my pearl clutching teachers thought there was something wrong with me, like after she saw me reading like a Clive Barker novel or something like that before the class, you know, and that was like late 1980s. So that was the shit that horror fans had to put up with like back in the day. I don't know if that's still the case, but back then it was like, if you liked horror at all, especially if you were a girl, they were just kind of like, something's the matter with you. But yeah, as I mentioned, All About Evil is just buckets and buckets of fun. It's super fun, made with just such obvious affection for trashy old horror movies, and it's just kind of like filled to the brim with like homages, like little winks to it, like not just horror movies, but just like old classic horror movies, like classic literature. There's all kind of like funny, I mean, you don't need to know all of the references to enjoy the movie because it's still fun anyway, but I think that like richens the experience some. It's really, really gory. It's really over the top. I mean, Deborah in particular, I just love, like, as the movie goes on, she starts to wear, like, the beret and the fur and, like, with the cigarette, like acting all fucking. It's great. It's so funny. She just like chews the scenery up. She's just like completely demented, and it's really awesome. So, like I said, if you ever wanted to see kind of like what a mashup of maybe like a John Waters movie and a H.G. Lewis movie would be, this is probably as close as you're gonna get. So, if you're into horror comedies, if you're into trash cinema, if you're into like camp horror, camp cinema, anything like that, then you definitely should see this. It's a really lot of fun, and I liked it a lot. Like I said, it's on Shudder at the moment, and also Severin Films has a Blu-ray. It might be streaming elsewhere, not really sure, but yeah, I would really recommend this one if you like horror comedies and if you like really gory, like over the top kind of stuff. So yeah, that will do it for this Flickers of Fear, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.